Well, hello again. It's time for one of the giants of the weird media field. We're joined this week by Quill to talk about Homestuck. So, join us, won't you? I don't do an intro or anything on these. I just we'll be talking, and at some point it'll just fade up from whatever.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to miss that juicy random bullshit at the beginning.
Ostensibly, though, we're here to talk about a piece of media.
We are.
For those of you, for those of the audience who maybe missed it the first time, can you give us the briefest introduction to who you are, Quill?
Sure. Hi, I'm Quill Turner, polyamorous Q on the various social media sites and things. I am a occasional lapsed game designer. I am a hobbyist voice actor is probably the best way to phrase that.
Sure.
I like to play tabletop role-playing games as often as possible, which is not nearly as often as I'd like, because as you probably gathered from what I imagine was the cold open, I am a father.
Yeah.
And I like to hang out and hopefully not suck.
Yeah. I literally just recommended one of your games to my niece.
Oh, really?
Yeah. She has gotten way into tabletop games, specifically D&D. When in her world, sure. that is tabletop gaming.
Yeah.
As is normal for that.
This is normal.
Yeah. For most people.
Which one?
Yeah. No, she's a fifth ed kid.
But I meant which one of mine.
Oh yeah. No, it was Hot Librarians.
Cool.
Librarians. Because that's just a good game and it's fun.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. But I'm every time we meet, I am desperate. I'm please play something that's not D&D. Please play. Can I give you recommendations? Can I give you games that are not D&D? But I managed to convince her. I'm wearing her down because I got her to play Starcrossed. Since
that's fun.
The last time that we talked, she was like, I played StarCrossed. Oh my God, it's amazing. I'm yes, I know. I've been telling you about this for 4 years.
That game feels like you give a teenager that game, and that feels like it's that's a move.
Oh, she's 20.
Sure, that's even better.
Oh no, God, she's older than that. Fuck. No, she's 22 or something like that. God damn it.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Time is an illusion. I feel old. Yeah. No, the problem is that she was born exactly 1 month after my wife and I got together, had our first date. So the only way I track my relationship, how long have I been with the person who is now my wife? Oh,
how old is this child?
Yeah, this person is now right. An adult with a car and a lease and
yeah.
That's how old my relationship is.
My relationship with my wife is old enough to drink.
Yeah. God damn it. Okay. So, but moving past the making us feel old, let's move into something that might be a little bit more youthful, at least from the when I'm seeing it. We're here to talk about Homestuck.
We're here to talk about Homestuck, Scott.
Yes.
Hey, Scott. Hey, this is a thing I've never actually said to anybody.
Yeah.
Let me tell you about Homestuck. You knew it had to happen. It had to happen. I had to say it. I have a question for you, actually, on the topic of being old.
Yeah.
What were you doing on April 13th of 2009?
I honestly would not be able to tell you, but I could probably look it up.
In general.
Yeah, but in general, I would have been
this isn't
a full ass adult going to a job, probably.
Sure.
That might have been the time when I was on nights.
Yeah, fair.
Mm-hmm.
I was in college the spring semester of my freshman year.
Okay.
Which is very funny thinking about that.
Sure.
Because in my head, Homestuck feels like a thing I read starting in high school.
Okay, yeah.
In case it wasn't clear, April 13th, 2009 is the date of the first Homestuck comic dropping.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
The text of which on this first page is A young man stands in his bedroom. It just so happens that today, the 13th of April, 2009, is this young man's birthday. Though it was 13 years ago he was given life, it is only today he will be given a name. What will the name of this young man be?
Yeah. Starting on an illustrious saga, almost, I might say. Yeah.
Yes, saga is a word for it, certainly.
So, if it's possible that anybody listening to this has no idea what Homestuck is. In fact, I know actually it's not possible. It's actually quite likely that they might have heard the word a lot and have no fucking clue what it actually is. Can you give us like the broadest possible explanation of what Homestuck is?
The broadest possible explanation of Homestuck. Homestuck is a webcomic, okay, that ran for a very long time.
Yes.
I guess not compared to some other webcomics. This is not questionable content, which has run for like 20 years. But it ran for several years, which is a pretty long time.
Okay, I'm sorry to derail us so early.
Go for it.
I anytime anybody brings up questionable content, I have to bring up my like tiny little questionable content thing, which is that the way I found out about that comic was I posted my webcomic in a forum of like, hey, promo your stuff. And the next person to post was Jeff Jocks on literally comic number 3 of questionable content.
That's incredible.
And I said, interesting, let me check this out. And I have been reading it ever since.
It's a good one. That's a good comic.
So that's okay. Now we can get back to the topic at hand. Yeah.
But yes, so Homestuck is a webcomic that ran for a while. That I do think saga is the right term for it. There are several large breaks in there. But the gist is the sort of very bare bones of the story. The conceit, I guess, is there are these 4 kids, these 13-year-old kids who are all very excited to begin playing this new video game that they're about to release called Sburb, which is sort of a like haha Sims joke name, right? And turns out that this video game leads directly to the apocalypse, which they are then attempting to prevent and or reverse and or something over the course of a very long time.
Okay. That is I don't know much, but I happen to know that is a very brief version of what goes on. Yeah.
Brief version.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Homestuck is one of those properties that when you are on the outside looking in seems absolutely goddamn impenetrable. Like it is, and it occurs to me now, Quill, you've brought me two different pieces of media, both of which I would think have a very Herculean reward to effort ratio, like the amount that you have to get into them in order to get the.
I think that's rude to friends at the table, frankly.
Well, no, I sort of categorize all AP content as something that you kind of have to invest in order to really get just because of the it's all so serialized that you can't quite pick it up anywhere in, you can't just pick it up, even like some webcomics where you could just start reading. Right. But so you kind of really have to start from the beginning, and the time sink on those things is quite large. So it feels like a high investment thing. And I know Homestuck is large, and also you can't just pick it up. So what all that I'm saying is that I am now, I see some of what your tastes are like, I guess is what I say. I can make a judgment about the way that you like to interact with media based on.
I don't appreciate being called out like this.
I find Homestuck fascinating because it must be, I can look at Homestuck having not experienced any of it and feel what I imagine other people feel when they look at like Star Wars Extended Universe, right? Where you're like, oh, here's a thing that other people care about so much. And it is utterly and I will admit the naming stuff, like the fact that the video game's called like Splurb is one of those things that is very, particular and that you probably get used to. But I know some of the other words that have come out of Homestuck, including the word Homestuck, right?
What other words do you know? I'm so curious.
Oh, it's mostly names. I think I've heard.
Sure.
Yeah. Just the tendency to put certain letters together in clusters as a sort of phonotactic rule set that is not necessarily like English. And that is something I was trying to draw a parallel to, Star Wars Extended Universe, where they're like, let's name this kid Glub Shido, and you're like, okay, I guess that's a serious character we're gonna have to pay attention to.
Carcat is a Star Wars name.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, and Star Wars has fucking jizz, right? Like that's their version of jazz. And they're like, we just chose this in the 70s and we've not revised it since. And we're just going to fucking go with it. So
it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, yeah. So this is my context is that almost all of the information that I know or have been exposed to, I didn't retain all of it, of course, is I think I watched the Sarah Zed 3-hour Homestuck explained video, which was not really about the plot, but it's mostly about the fandom itself and sort of the actually spent a lot of times about the drama about the production of the video games or lack thereof. Because I am sucker for a very long ass YouTube video about a subject that I know nothing about. Oh yeah.
Fair.
So can you, I hate to say this, but can you sell us on what Homestuck brings to the table?
Sure. Sort of.
Yeah.
So Homestuck is complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Homestuck, I think, as you have probably gathered, is the thing that I realize regularly. I come across things and I go, why do I like this thing so much? This type of thing. And then I think about it and I go, oh, I started to like this because it was in Homestuck. Or Homestuck is the first thing I remember liking that has this in it.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So Homestuck is one of those things where it has had a big impact on my particular aesthetic tastes. Yeah. I think in a way that I have come to appreciate more recently, weirdly enough.
Okay. Yeah.
In terms of selling people on Homestuck, honestly, if you haven't read Homestuck, I don't really recommend you go do that. A lot of it has not aged well in a real way. And it's a big mess and it's very complicated. Mm-hmm. But also a lot of it, I do think it's really groundbreaking and fascinating in the ways that it takes the medium of existing on a web page and allows that to drive the ways it can tell a story in the sense that most webcomics are a webcomic. You could pretty much print it in a book and get the same thing or print it in a newspaper or whatever, right? Yeah. Like they're comics in the traditional sense.
Yes.
Whether that's a superhero comic book comic or a newspaper comic strip or whatever, whichever one of those you choose to do. Whereas Homestuck is not that.
Yes.
Homestuck pages are, generally speaking, a single image, one picture, right? Under which is text of varying lengths, sometimes extremely long.
Yeah.
Right. The one I read to you that's the original one is framed like a and this is a common device in the story. It's like a text RPG.
Yes.
Including like the links to go to the next page are as though someone has typed it into a chat prompt. The link to go to the next page says enter name. Yeah. Right. And the other ones will be like open chest, you know?
And if I recall correctly, like there was an audience participation element early on
that is correct.
I know it kind of, I don't know if it stuck with it as long as it was, but that was not the first time the creator did that. The preceding webcomic was called MS Paint Adventures.
Sort of
preceding. Yeah. Okay.
Well, no. So it is preceding. So the website they're on is called MS Paint Adventures. The preceding comic is Problem Sleuth.
Excuse me.
And this is why I remember reading Homestuck in high school, even though I didn't, because I read Problem Sleuth in high school.
And that was very participation
exclusively, entirely.
That was its main gimmick. That one I had friends who actually were reading it as it came out in the way that went.
Yes.
There is definitely, I've heard about some of the things that Homestuck does in terms of format. Which is really interesting. It's not. I know it's not the first comic to do that. I remember comics in the late '90s, in early HTML. They were full up coding, interactions and animations and stuff like that, and breaking the thing. But there's absolutely not going to be a comic with more influence that was using that kind of conventions. That Homestuck is not. It's not the first one to do it, but it's the first one to be popular and do it.
Right. Because it's the format thing where it's like it's the single image with the text, and then a lot of times the text is not a narrator's text, it is
Yeah.
a chat log.
Yeah.
Right. And Frey, like, very clearly, like, this is an AIM chat log, AIM chat log, right? And complete with every character has their own username, which means that every character has 2 names.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
And also every character has a color associated with them, and they're all distinct. And sometimes, and all of those names are also get shortened into like 2 initials.
Okay.
Right. They're all 2-word names for the most part. And so they get shortened to initials. And so sometimes those names get referenced only by their initials. And it's a lot to fucking remember.
Yeah.
And I haven't even told you how many fucking characters there are.
Yes.
There's a lot.
Before we leave the format talking or the format subject, I am reminded of an absolutely fantastic book, Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud.
I have seen this referenced many times.
It's from the mid-90s, and this is one of the guys who was like, I remember him as the OG webcomics guy. He was the guy who not just was working in the industry and really interested in it, but was the guy who's like, this can change things. Like, you can do new art in webcomics that you could not have done in traditional print comics. And it's a fascinating book, and I would believe still relevant to this day. If my memory serves, it's 100%.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, it's really, really cool in the way that like excellent talking about art often can be. Mind you, that being said, I haven't read it in 20 years, so it's possible that maybe, I don't know, it could drop some slurs in the middle of it. I don't know, but I remember correctly, it's a really, really good book, and it directly approaches these kinds of subjects.
Yeah, no, I've seen it referenced. I think it gets mentioned actually. So there was a part of the reason Homestuck is on my brain these days is, I think a year or 2 ago, a very good Homestuck like reread podcast dropped called Homestuck Made This World from Cam Kunzelman and Michael Lutz, who do a bunch of other like critical media podcasts, and they did like a critical reading of Homestuck in part so that Cameron can write an essay or a book on it, on the history of Homestuck and the fandom, because Cameron, I think it was Cameron and not Michael. I'm pretty sure it was Cam, was in the fandom in a real way. And this is another unique thing about my reading of Homestuck. I was never in the fandom.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. I didn't post on the forums. I was not doing cosplay. I was not participating in discussions. I just read it. Yeah. Like, which I imagine there's lots of other people like me. Oh, for sure. That's not the experience of being a Homestuck fan that is, I think, typically associated with the property.
It is so hard to determine what is the average fan and what is just the loudest people who happen to make the most noise.
Right.
Yeah.
And Homestuck is like a particularly egregious example of that, I think.
Well, and even based off just what you've described to me, it is a property that is sort of laser focused demographically at people who are terminally online
in a real way.
Yes. I was thinking about, because mind you, I haven't read it. I've seen like art from it. I've seen panels, and I've seen fan animatics and things like this. And I was reminded so much that you were talking about the aesthetic, the like literal art style for lots and lots of the panels is, I don't mean this to sound insulting, it's so deviant art.
Right.
It's so 2000s deviant art. Yeah.
And I think also deviant art fed off of Homestuck in a real way.
Yeah.
And
like to the point where a bunch of the characters look like they could have been generated in a pick crew kind of, I'm going to make my own kind of thing.
I'm kind of surprised. There must be a Homestuck pick crew.
There absolutely is. There is. I'm sure there's Homestuck character generators out there.
Homestuck Trollsona pick crew.
God. Yeah. And in a purely mercenary way, I don't know if this, I can't imagine this was intentional. That would be such a baller marketing move, but by choosing to be that way and making the art so formulaic and standard, it made it and differentiating characters is based off things like color choices and like sort of accessory choices. Like you don't have to, you can basically assemble characters piecemeal out of the component bits and adding on little bits, which means that you get all of the people creating trolls and creating characters in the Homestuck style in order to use them as their profile photos and, put them on their DeviantArt pages and stuff like that, which gives you a it gives it people. It's got a built-in way for people to interact with it in a fandom sense, and that can be very good for spreading something, because if you see enough people with Homestuck avatars, you're gonna go, "What the fuck is that?" And then when you might end up going reading it. So like it's not a, like I said, I can't imagine it was actually intentional as a sort of like let's make this specifically marketable, but because of the way it was constructed, I think it is extra susceptible to that.
Yes, I think that's true, and I don't know that specifically was particularly intentional, right? Because I mean, that was his art style before. It's the same art style as in Problem Sleuth, but also there are a lot of choices in Homestuck that are specifically, like you mentioned, that it's directed at terminally online people. It is at many points specifically directed at its own readers. Yeah, in a way that is like almost rude. Like, and it is constantly making fun of the people reading it.
Interesting.
Like in where like there's a whole character who is like a major antagonist, and his whole deal is being a like shitty, entitled like consumer of media who thinks that his ideas are better than what's happening in the media.
Gotcha.
Right. In a comic which specifically included the readers of the comic, like putting actions in it, like,
that's super fucking targeted. Now that being said, what that says to me is, I mean, not to psychoanalyze a creator whose work I've never even read, but that sounds to me like somebody who is deeply involved with their own fandom, right? Like that they're not just aware of their audience, but are like deeply aware of a lot of what's going on with that group as well. And that can be, that doesn't have to be a bad or good thing. It can be, it can go many different ways depending on how the creator and the audience interact with one another. But it definitely speaks to a sort of integration between them, which falls perfectly in line with the idea that it starts with a certain amount of the audience participating and saying like, I want you guys to solicit idea, or I want you guys to provide ideas to me so that I can then make them into the comic. Very interesting.
No, Andrew Hussie definitely has and they grow away from this as the comic moves on, and it becomes more, they have a story they're trying to tell. And write, and take forever to write in a real way and prepare things. And, eventually by the end of the comic, there's a whole team of artists and musicians and stuff working on these gigantic animations and flash games and stuff.
Because it was big business at one point. Like that was in an era where I think this was pre-Patreon almost entirely. I don't think that Patreon.
I believe so. Yes.
I don't think that.
I think there was a Kickstarter for one of the video games, but no, I think this was pre-Patreon. But the Topatoko store,
so it was like it's merch sales and like web banner ads. Like that's the art that's what you're deriving your income from, and you need a huge base to be able to like not just like
to monetize like that.
To monetize like that. Like, okay, sustaining one creator's worth of buying ramen for one creator. Okay, that's not, you don't need that many people you do need a large number of people, but like there are many webcomic creators who got that far. And like there are 1% of the webcomic creators who got to like living off of it, like could hire a colorist, and then you have Hussie, who was not just able to buy, was able to like hire entire animation studios to work on certain parts of the project.
Well, I don't know how that worked, right? I don't know. I truly don't know. And it might have been. I don't know if they were paid.
So the if I'm remembering correctly, and again, this is from Sarah Zed's video, some of the money that was supposed to go to the video games ended up going towards the actual comic animations.
That makes sense.
That's an allegation that may or may not be true.
But that's the thing that was said. I believe it. I just truly, genuinely don't know. And I do know that like all the people who ended up working on these things started doing fan work. That's how Hussie came to be aware of the people who eventually worked with them on actually producing the comic, including people like, I forgot his name.
The Undertale guy.
The Undertale guy, Toby Fox. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to pause you for just a second so I can let my dogs out of the office.
Cool.
Yeah, I know. See her. how dare you keep this door closed? I can't immediately jump on her. Okay.
This is rude and cruel. How dare you?
Yeah, and that the fact that so many creators who ended up working in official capacities started off as fans, I think again repoints to the same sort of like deeply involved with its own fan base,
right?
That the creator was,
which obviously has its own set of positives and negatives.
This is also sort of normalization of the conversation of things like parasocial relationships and how an audience and how a crowd can interact with a single creator to both sides' detriments. And it's I can imagine.
Well, and it goes several layers deep too, because I'm sure this is difficult for Hussey to manage as a like person who's trying to deal with this legion of like demanding fans, but also
who are also a young audience,
right? A broadly young audience,
which
who
just
are terminally online, right? And then also they have self inserts constantly in the comic, including literally a character who is just called Andrew Hussey. Who's like is in fiction the author of the fiction, but also has takes active steps to manipulate the things that are happening in the comic. Like there's a point where they move to fourth walls to be just apart from each other. So that the characters can take a miniature spaceship through one fourth wall and into the other one.
That's a whole thing.
I don't know. It's a lot. It's hard for me to imagine being Andrew Hussey at any point in this process.
What little I know about them, again, mostly from Sarah Zed's work and the interaction that she had with them is a very particular individual. I would.
For me, and this is coming from a person who does not consume a lot of film as a rule, I think Homestuck is the closest thing to an auteur project that I have ever consumed.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And it's a little different, right? Because there is like obviously community input in a way. But also there's a whole bunch of community input. And then Hussey goes, that one.
Sure.
I'm going to use this one. And, and in the podcast that I listened to where they read through, there were physical books of Homestuck that came out, at least for some of it. It didn't get through all of it. Which fucking bananas to me. I don't know what their plan was for the later stuff where there's like a 25-minute video. Like, what are you going to do a book for that? But like, and it's annotated by Hussey with commentary and stuff. And they, I forgot where it was going. What was I talking about?
I don't know. The creator as an auteur. As an auteur work.
And they talk about with the people like submitting prompts for the next thing. Talked about at a certain point near the end of when they were just like, I'm just going to stop taking prompts. There were so many prompts being put in that they could just pick the one that they wanted to be the next thing that happened because someone would always submit it.
Just law of large numbers. This is reminding me so much of Davey Whedon. Have you played the Stanley Parable and or the Beginner's Guide?
I have not played the Stanley Parable. No.
The amount of sort of meta-textual stuff that goes on, and then also the meta-narrative stuff that goes on between, especially with the Beginner's Guide, where like Davey Whedon has a fictional version of himself as the sort of creator of the Davey Whedon, the creator of Stanley Parable, has a fictional version of himself in the Beginner's Guide, which is recounting not real events or events that, as far as I can tell, are not real, about another creator that he has made up in order to like tell a story about creation and the making of creative endeavors and like what that does to you emotionally. And this is reminding me very much of that.
It's very much in that ballpark. It sounds like. And like to be clear, I'm not claiming that like Hussey invented this concept or anything. It's it was it was new for me.
Sure.
Right. Like.
And there's, I mean, nothing is new. There's nothing new under the sun. But also like stuff can be innovative for its time and in its execution and all those things. And innovative for its audience, which is yeah, it's one of those things like you have to give people their due. Like, I mean, obviously this is a massive project that, although there was a team behind it, like is basically one person's baby.
Right.
And like anything that rises to that level of success and simultaneously is that big and impressive, like, come on, like you gotta give them their due that, like, come on, they made something that people really love and really affected people, and really tapped into something that seems to be, you know, a grab certain people by the brainstem kind of content.
Indeed.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, one pin I want to put in, we can come back to it later, but the idea of you were talking about the books and like the way of preserving this media is actually like non-trivial.
Indeed.
Because so much of it is like built into the coding of like, and like, wasn't a huge section of it done in Flash?
Yes,
So like when
all
Flash,
the animations and the interactive game segments, which there are whole like little point and click like walk around video game sections with dialogue trees. That's all done in Flash.
Yeah.
So the way that's been preserved, and this is how I reread it when I was reading along with the podcast I listened to, is there is an application called the Homestucked Reader, and it's basically, you know, I'm not a coder, so I can't tell you specifically, but basically what it is, it opens up a little window that more or less is like a browser window that's been, you know, fossilized in time from 2011.
Yeah, running local files and stuff,
Flash stuff.
Oh, I wonder if it's containerized or if it's using virtualization or something, because that would be fascinating. How do you like the occasionally for I remember having to do this for old games. I haven't had to do it in a long time because we've gotten considerably better about making older games accessible. But there was a time when you wanted to play an old game, you like booted up a virtual version of Windows XP.
Right.
Yeah. So that you could, And I wonder if they just containerized that into a little application that
I have definitely done that to play Roller Coaster Tycoon.
Oh yeah,
that is a thing that I have personally done.
yeah. Is Roller Coaster Tycoon the one that like was written in an assembly so you can run it on anything?
I have no idea. I don't. That doesn't sound right, but who knows? I guess.
Yeah. I'm thinking of something. It doesn't. We're so far off topic. It doesn't matter. So the preservation of digital content is something that we are, as a society, have been historically very, very bad at. I'm glad that somebody has gone through the effort to actually go in and make a version that can be handled at least longer. And perpetuity is the wrong word, but like something that can be maintained and hopefully continue to be ported into the future.
Yes.
I want to shout out, just off the topic, to the Internet Archive for like specifically like holding on to stuff like that so that people can get a hold of it and get access to it, because it is so. Everybody talks about the internet being forever, but it's actually it's actually incredibly ephemeral.
Dead links are a problem all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And like content that was like formative to a lot of people, like existing as part of a dead language, basically, because the system by which it was in which it was programmed is just gone now. All of those, with the death of Flash, with the death of all of those Newgrounds games that we played back when we were kids, and for better and worse, of course. Like they're
some of those maybe better gone.
Yeah, but I mean, but at the same time, like, I don't know. I'm kind of a maximalist upon containing stuff, because who knows how that data might be useful in the future,
Right. And it's an argument. It's like, there's probably some problematic stuff in all of that, but also, like, I don't know, we read Mark Twain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and also even just like
no one's like, or no, most reasonable people are not like, we shouldn't be reading Mark Twain.
Yeah. And preserving problematic media is important for things, even for like research and people to go back and do media criticism and look at like, here is the development of, a movement, and like, here's the way things were being talked about at the time is super important for understanding things. So like just the loss of any data is kind of something to be lamented. So it's good that people are working their asses off to, I'm sure, maintain the availability of things like Homestuck. So you were reading it as it came out?
I was reading it as it came out.
Okay.
Yes, I was reading it live, pretty much.
was webcomics are a format in which I am deeply, deeply interested. There are some, I'm reading questionable content to this day. So it's probably one of the pieces of media that's been in my life the longest.
Same.
And the sort of drip of content from things like webcomics is super interesting. I get the impression that Homestuck did something more like a dumps. Towards the end there.
Yeah. For the first significant chunk, maybe the first half, it was the standard webcomic drip. We're going to do a page a day or a few pages a day or a few pages a week or whatever it might be, to varying degrees of speed and pace. And my recollection is, for the beginning of the comic, it was actually remarkably fast.
Sure.
Partially because the way that Hussey did all of this was it's lots of reusing backgrounds and reusing stuff for a lot of this art. And it's, pulling stock art or clip art or, stuff, public domain photographs, things like that as your background. So they're not sitting down and doing full, by hand or digitally by hand artwork for every panel. There's lots of reuse that they can do. But later on, things start to take longer. And in fact, much longer. There's a thing called, I believe, the Gigapause, which was over a year long.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Between updates, right? And then they would drop here's a flash video and 70 pages or something, right?
Yeah.
It was basically oh, here's the next book, right?
Yeah. That's not the only project I've heard of doing a sort of dumps that, doing sort of chapters at a time. Doing a full book at a time is definitely very unusual for the webcomic industry. It does something also to the success of Homestuck that was just a financially viable thing to do.
Well, to some extent, it was better, because the thing that Homestuck always feeds on in the fandom is discourse.
Sure.
And if you sit there on a cliffhanger and people can yell about it for months and months and months and months and months, that's almost better for Hussey in a lot of ways.
Sure. Yeah. And I was also going to think in terms of creating your art, having to put out a page a day or 3 pages a day or 3 pages a week or whatever your set schedule is. If you don't have a buffer, you're not working ahead, then that is a rough way to create a story.
Right. Because I hope you don't get sick.
Well, and also no, even just creatively, it's hey, you better be making good decisions every day and never drop the ball and never want to go back and change anything, because
webcomics problem.
Yeah. And for a lot of webcomic artists who are not working ahead, who do not have a buffer, who do not plan, they're just kind of drawing what they do. That can be real rough, man. So I completely understand the sort of, if you had the leeway, you have a big enough fan base and enough money to go, oh no, we're going to wait a year and we're going to get this right. That's it's almost like it's a virtue in a lot of ways. It's the ability to go, we're going to take the time and we're going to take the extra, the leeway that's been given to us by our success in order to refine what we're doing and not feel like we have to keep putting something out every day. We can take the time to properly plan this, which includes, I'm sure, things like rewrites and editing, something that a lot of webcomics do not ever get. Yeah.
And then just with the sheer complexity of the plot lines that are in this story by the end of the thing, I have to imagine that there were major rewrites, because they would get 70% through writing stuff and go, oh god damn it, I forgot about this thing that happened 400 pages in 3 real life years ago that's deeply important and also is going to fuck everything up, right?
And with a plot that you describe as being big and expansive and lots and lots of characters and things like that, it's interesting to me, the advice I'm not somebody you would go to for advice on stuff, but one of the advices I constantly am giving people is pare back, cut down, refine what you're doing. And it does not sound like that was the Homestuck philosophy. The Homestuck philosophy seems to be go hard, all no brakes, all gas. Let's just fucking like do absolutely everything all of the time.
Scott, I mentioned to you that I had some notes for
Sure.
this conversation. I have a section of my notes that I've entitled Dramatis Personae.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Let me just speed through this real quick for you. Ready?
Yeah.
So I mentioned at first, so this is a story about 4 teenagers, 4 13-year-old kids, right? The 4 human children. The names are John, Dave, Rose, and Jade.
Yeah.
We soon meet 12 trolls.
Yes.
From, we will come to learn, an alternate universe. These are themed from the Zodiac.
Mm-hmm.
We later meet 12 more trolls, which are from a previous iteration of that alternate universe. They are versions of semi-mythologized ancestors of the first set of trolls, who are themselves versions of semi-mythologized ancestors of the second version of trolls. And then we meet 4 more human kids.
Yeah.
Named Jake, Dirk, Roxy, and Jane, from a previous iteration of the first set of kids universe, who are versions of the various guardians of the first set of kids, who are themselves versions of the various guardians of the second set of kids. This is most but not all of the protagonists. And a couple of antagonists / anti-heroes mixed in there for spice. But that's math 32 characters. And they're almost exclusively protagonists.
There is there a way to look at that and go like, okay, this is I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but sometimes you have to assume that the machine is designed to do what the machine does. Mm-hmm. And a story like this that has 32 protagonists, you have to imagine is in part because, there will be somebody, and probably several somebodies in this list that you love and that you will identify with and that you're going to want to see much more content with, somebody that you're willing to slog through everything else for. And there's also going to be characters that you hate so much that when they're brought up on forums, you are going to yell about it to no end. Right?
The Vriska problem.
Yes, that's the only character name that I know, because it's the divisiveness of Vriska is so mimetic that it breached containment and has made it to the rest of the internet. Which is, I don't know, like it's a sort of maximalist approach of like, let's do everything all at once.
Extremely. And and a lot of those characters basically don't matter. Honestly, what is arguably my favorite troll is the first character in the series to get fully offed. And like part of the reason I like her is because her zodiac sign is Leo, and that's mine. Oh, the other thing I should mention about those 12 trolls, the original 12, they're based on the zodiac signs. They're called trolls because that's the name of their alien species, but also because they first show up as just like other users on this chat client who seemingly show up to troll the kids. They're internet trolls in a real way, and each one of them is specifically a type of guy on the internet. In the non-gendered sense. Guy.
Right? I think we're getting to the point where guy is just like guys. They're just guys. Like it's not. You can. Anybody can be a guy,
especially
if you're on the internet.
Guy. Where it's like Nepeta, the one that I was talking about, who's a Leo, is a furry role player.
Okay.
Very specifically.
Yes.
And then Karkat is a nihilistic, angry, depressed man. And then there's another guy who's a shitty incel. Right? Like
again, like I don't know if this is deliberate or not, but man, like perfect, like laser designed in a lab to appeal to a certain kind of internet content, a high schooler or middle schooler who has spent too much time on the internet.
And then coupled with, these are zodiac signs. It's just like, it's the astrology thing for the terminally online. Literally. The fact that it uses the zodiac makes it feel super deliberate to me. That like we know what we're doing when we do this, and it's going to work.
despite the fact that everybody probably should be able to look at this and go, yeah, this is what's happening here. We're not being subtle about it, and it still fucking works. Because humans can be counted upon to divide themselves into categories based off of the most superficial similarities. Like, yeah, yeah, for sure. Experiencing Homestuck as a non-Homestuck person is, like I said, it seems impenetrable. And I think it's sort of like, again, I think that almost might be deliberate, that it's meant to be strange. It's meant to be sort of its own cultural language in a lot of ways, so that it can foster a community of people who feel super involved with it. And it, aesthetically, not in terms of the art, but in terms of a lot of the decisions around the art, and also around the kinds of plots it has and the characters, just sort of the trappings of it feel sort of very targeted at that sort of young, middle to high schooler age online person of like, it's got a kind of edginess to it, but an irreverence, a kind of silliness, but also like an ability to take itself seriously, which I associate very much with that sort of middle school to high school pipeline. Era.
Simultaneously deeply aware of itself and ironic, and also completely genuinely like enthusiastic and not ironic at all.
It's like got just enough of a veneer of cynicism and just enough edge that a high schooler will not feel embarrassed for liking it, but is also like still fully in the like cartoon space of we're just going to have everything be big all of the time, and you're going to be able to like throw your whole heart into it. For sure.
Everything here is deeply ridiculous and gigantic in all the ways. Yeah.
Very interesting. I that would also explain a lot of when viewing it from the outside, it definitely reads as sort of cringe content. Totally. Yeah, that it is itself so simultaneously edgy and genuine that like you may not like Homestuck, but you probably liked something that other people think of as a Homestuck, and so it's really easy. There's a whole, the ContraPoints did the YouTuber ContraPoints did an absolutely fantastic video essay about cringe, and where it really is a self-reflective emotion. And it's not, you don't cringe at things that like are completely unlike you. You cringe when you see a version of yourself that you don't like in something else.
There's a reason I don't like awkward situational comedies.
Yeah. As an aside, I might cut this, but do you watch Tested, the YouTube channel?
I have not. I don't know.
Then this will fall on deaf ears. There's a guy on there named Norman Chang, and I can't stand watching him because when I look at him, I see the person that I worry everybody else sees when they look at me. And I'm like, and it's like you're not doing anything wrong, man. You're living your best life. You're a good guy. You're a content creator. You're great. I can't fucking stand looking at you because, like I said, it's the version of myself that I think other people see.
Cannot be for me.
Well, it's like you're too. I see all of my worst qualities in you, and they're not necessarily that bad, but I hate myself. Yeah. But yeah, so like, okay, so do you have a relationship? You said you weren't part of the fandom, so but the perception of the fandom is a very big part of Homestuck's presence online. So how does it feel to be like not a member of the fandom but still a fan of the thing?
I mean, I don't know, weird, but also it doesn't. It's far enough removed that it doesn't like come up in conversation a lot.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like. Honestly, most of the time it comes up in conversation. It's because I bring it up because I think it's funny.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
sure. Yeah. I will bring up the concept of Star Wars extended universe, but just Star Wars in general, where like there was a time where I was very proudly a Star Wars fan, and that did get killed by the other Star Wars fans. Like, you know what? I really like Star Wars, and I'm not gonna admit that anymore.
Yeah. No, I mean the one for that's like me is Critical Role.
Sure. Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Where like I like you mentioned, witty and questionable content from page 3 or whatever, I
Yeah.
was watching Critical Role from like episode 2 or episode 3 when I could be in the Twitch chat and have conversations in the main Twitch chat.
Oh yeah, because it wasn't a wall of speeding by text. Yeah.
Like I met people I still talk to today in that Twitch chat. Like,
yeah, and talking about a community, again, it's sort of a property that's sort of laser designed to appeal to a sort of kind of terminally online. I'm not sure Critical Role is not necessarily terminally online. It's a different guy. It aims at a different guy.
Yeah.
But it definitely, it's going to hit the worst kind of those people as well on the internet as well.
Yeah.
And that just like any community, the worst people in that community sometimes become the emblematic version of
the loudest ones, because the most talkative ones, right? Well, and because the law of numbers to some extent, right?
And also, it's like if just the nature of online spaces that like the nice thing that like when all the people who are just hanging around and liking a thing and making fan art and liking each other's fan art and sharing it on Tumblr or whatever, those people don't draw any attention to themselves outside of the fandom. It's only when that fandom creates problems that it starts becoming interesting enough in the sense that it gets
outside
covered.
Of itself.
Yeah, outside. So drama and death threats and
bad behavior,
behavior, and to a certain extent when people like don't understand the sort of natural social boundaries of like when something should be brought up and when something shouldn't.
Right.
I'm looking at you, fucking bronies. Where like there was a period of time. I'm not. By the way, I'm ragging on these guys because I was a member of this community for a while, and I'm lambasting myself. But like the people who did not know when not to bring this shit up because it wasn't what was the topic of conversation. But like,
it's not everything is about it.
Yes, and so like but you, because you are so obsessed and because it's you enjoy it so much, it is everything you want to talk about. And so it feels like it permeate you drag it along with you like Pigpen, and leave your footprints all over the place, and that creates just by its nature kind of creates problems in certain spaces, and that becomes a thing that people then talk about, which sort of stains the reputation of both the fandom and the community. That is we've talked about some particular fandoms, but that is a incredibly common thing with anything that grows to a certain size and has a certain amount of fervor behind it. I mean, like the Owl House didn't escape this. Fucking Legend of Korra didn't escape this.
Right.
Fucking like honestly, professional sports doesn't escape this. Like we're just used to it because we've been talking about football for 100 years.
Right.
But
professional sports fandom doesn't exist primarily on the internet.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But like it's just a nature of the nature of the beast with any kind of like fandom or community. So is there anything you want to cover about Homestuck before we kind of wrap things up here?
Yeah.
I know you've got notes. I'm sure we didn't get to a third of them.
We got to a solid chunk of them. Okay. I mean, there's a lot more like characters I could cover, but like you get the gist. There's a jillion of them.
Yeah.
That's the important thing is there's just so fucking many. But the main thing that I want to talk about, the thing that like keeps coming up in my life is a thing that I'm like, why do I like this so much? And I realized recently, I was like, oh, this is all Homestuck shit. I deeply love any time that we get like themed names or titles or like groups of characters, right? And Homestuck is chock full of this shit.
Sure, yeah.
Right? I already mentioned the Zodiac trolls. Yeah. Right. So like, oh, look, here's a set that are, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
The 4 kids, their handles, they're like online handles are all done. All of their handles use the 4 letters that are also short for the amino acids in DNA, which comes up.
Yeah. Okay.
Like in the fiction.
Yeah.
Like pretty much. But there's also like, there's a whole set of characters that are called the Felt, and they are pool, like billiards themed. Sure. Where there's 15 of them, and each of them has a stupid power that's kind of based on the number of billiard ball that they represent. There's the number 8 is the only one of them. The number 8 is the only one of them who isn't primarily like white and is instead black.
Sure,
and she's called Snowball, right? And then there's a cue ball guy named Doc Scratch.
Okay.
Right? Like, and so it's all thematic or whatever. And then the cue ball guy turns out to be like the herald of the main antagonist, whose name is Lord English, which is another billiards joke.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, God, that's some fucking anime bullshit.
It is
so very. A work that could not have been created in the 80s just because the cultural cross contamination hadn't happened yet. I mean, not I mean, throwing shade, of course, because I like to throw shade, but like that's not a problem necessarily. It's just a thing that definitely screams a particular kind of television to me.
Well, right. It's that, and then there's a whole set of people that are like very clearly like, these are black chess pieces and these are white chess pieces. Like that's the character design for this whole set of like this whole species, basically.
Okay.
Up into the point where there's a white queen and a black queen, and they are the most powerful characters in the thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, and then, but then there's also, beyond just like these are themed sets, I am a sucker for titles.
Okay.
And this is chock full of them. Every one of the kids and trolls has a title that's like in fiction.
Okay.
They're like role in the video game. Because also they're all still playing the video game technically always forever.
Right.
And it's like they're all the X of Y, the heir of breath, the maid of time, the rogue of space, that sort of thing. And I'm like, God damn it, I love that shit so much. And then they all also have associated planets, and those are also named similarly. It's the land of heat and clockwork, the land of pyramids and neon, the land of tense and mirth, right? Like...
Sorry, you flashed me back to the like young adult titles that were always the blank of blank and blank.
No, totally, yeah.
Which is just like, God damn it,
right? But these things being so like obviously of a set is a thing that just like holds a deep aesthetic appeal to me.
Sure,
I have had in my like my little GMing heart forever. I desperately want a setting that has playing card themed villain faction.
Oh, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
We're like, this is the king of spades and this is the queen of hearts. And there's these whatever, like they're all factionally aligned with each other. And I've sort of done that in my like space game. It hasn't come up a lot, but it's there.
Well, and like what GM among us hasn't looked at the tarot major arcana and been like, hey, what if we just took this and we slid it into our project and then it was now a thing. I say that as I have done not a version of that, but a something not too far off from that in the thing I'm writing as we speak, basically. Yeah.
No, that stuff is I think inherently appealing to some extent. Sure. Our brains like to categorize stuff, but I do think it's particularly appealing to me. For whatever reason.
Yeah. And there's something like, where am I going with this? The like understanding what it is that you like that sets you off is like always like a better way to find the media and to understand what it is that it gives you a deeper relationship with the things that you enjoy. You're like, oh, okay, I like this because it has the things I like in it. Right. It can be a very fan fiction-y approach to media consumption where you're like, I like quote unquote enemies to lovers, you're like, that's a thing that I like.
Sometimes it's a trope.
Yeah.
And I like that trope, damn it.
Yeah. And like, but like it's same thing with like, I'm a sucker. Like I will, if I see a piece of media and it's got fucking werewolves in it, I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah. I want werewolves in it. I will immediately try to consume that thing. And like, that's not, there's nothing bad about that. It's just, you understand what it is or not. You understand, okay, here's a flag for me of something that is appealing and that I understand myself a little bit better because I like it that way. Nothing wrong with that.
I mean, somebody says, hey, this book or show has some polyamorous characters in it. And I go, tell me more immediately.
Are you playing Baldur's Gate?
I just started.
Okay,
so,
good.
Yeah.
So spoiler, I guess spoiler alert, but like canonically poly people in it. Like,
yes.
Yeah. Like, yeah.
And there's that, and like I read Iron Widow on the strength of basically that recommendation.
Yeah.
Like,
sure. Yeah.
I mean, they also said, "Hey, this is about mecha," and I went, "Oh,
yeah,
I like those. I like big robots."
Yeah. Okay. I do. Okay. How far are you into BG3? Because I'm in the
beginning. I just got to the Druid's Grove. So
okay. So you haven't even you've met like
I haven't even met all the companions yet.
Oh yeah. Well, you won't hit all of them until Act 3.
Sure. I'm about to go attempt to find Halsin, I think.
Okay.
Probably.
Yeah.
Like,
so
I'm very early.
You've picked up Astarion. You've probably picked up.
I have Astarion, Gale, Shadowheart, and Will. I don't have Lae'zel. She ran away when the ship crashed, and I haven't found her again.
Oh, okay. Look slightly south of the. I'm surprised you didn't find her on the way to the Druid's Grove. You'll find her. Yeah. Go slightly south. You'll find her again.
Understood.
And you will make sure you have a charismatic person talk to those guys. Make sure
I am a charismatic person.
Okay, good.
I am playing a charismatic rogue.
yeah. It's one of those. You're gonna have to get the right conversation check in order to make sure you get out of the situation. Well, it depends on how hard you're trying to save all those damn tieflings. But yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. The Baldur's Gate 3 is just a giant dating sim to me. So it's always like, who's the one that you've got it down bad for?
Mm-hmm. I didn't know because I had seen so much about Karlach. I didn't know that Will wants to murder her.
Yeah, but only for like 5 minutes.
Well, I figured, but he was very aggressive about wanting to murder her. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Hadn't heard that.
It takes all of like I don't think you even have to pass a skill check in order to convince him not to do it. It's like it's such a pretense.
That's very funny.
Yeah, no, but it's very funny. Fucking Karlach, man. I goddamn wept. Sorry, you're in for a ride on that one, depending on how close you get to that character. I finished my first playthrough, and I keep starting new ones because I can't figure out what my next one's going to be. Also, I have the terminal problem of I have a hard time being evil in video games now. Like I used to be able to do it, and now it's like I really want to see Minthara, the badass drow chick, but
right.
like I don't want to kill the Grove because like for plot reasons I need it because I need Karlach to get better, but also like I don't want to be mean, man. I don't want to fucking kill the nice people.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to play this character as like I'm playing a Dark Urge, right, and I'm trying to play her as like mean but not evil.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Like, kind of doesn't give a... And it's just hard to do that in RPGs because it's like, well, the choice I need to make to progress the plot is I'm going to help you find Halsin.
Yeah.
But also none of the options for that are... whatever. Like,
your closest version of it is like the selfish version of like, I'm not going to help you. I'm going to look for him so that I can get my own thing.
Right. And there was a conversation option that I was like, I mean, what are you going to offer me? Which I never usually pick, but I was like, that's the closest thing to this character, I think. Like, yeah.
I'm very interested in the Dark Urge. I'm not going to do Dark Urge until I go back and play 1 and 2 again. Because I was an OG Baldur's Gate fan.
I have not played the first 2. Know very little about them. Basically nothing.
I wouldn't recommend them. Well, no, it's just old games are hard to play now. Like because I
played Mass Effect 1 and Dragon Age Origins.
Okay, but like multiply that by like an order of magnitude because the difference between sincerely the difference between 1997 and 2007 is like
way different.
Yeah, completely different. Like we hadn't invented quest markers yet on your maps. Like
no.
Yeah, and like
that'd be so hard.
It is. I think the enhanced edition fixed things a little bit, but it's just one of those things where like the games weren't designed to be like this at the time because that wasn't how we played them, and we've gotten better at it over time. Game design, like anything else, has advanced as people figured things out. But like you'd have to go back in and rebuild the game from the ground up, like literally like start from scratch. Maybe you can use the assets, but you have to rethink how every single thing is done in the entire thing in order to fix some of these issues. So if you don't already have the nostalgia factor, you're going to have such a hard time like learning how to be a 1997 gamer again, like from the ground up. And I wouldn't recommend that kind of thing. Same way with like, but that's just a problem of the time, you know, like those particular games, I loved them and I still love them, but like, I mean, there's a reason why my online handle is Scott Paladin. The other one is WoW, of course, but like,
oh wow, shocker.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So is it like, do we cover everything on Homestuck that you want to talk about before I let you go?
Broadly, I mean, I was going to make a joke of speaking of impenetrable historical media.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's mostly it. Is just like the sheer breadth of the thing and the size of it, and just how much I realize on the regular, these things that are part of my taste in like stem from Homestuck, and honestly all the way back to Problem Sleuth in a lot of ways, just with styles of humor.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like the type of jokes that get made where it's not fully like lol random.
Yeah.
Right. But it's in that it is the space of like, here's like a big silly moment or like single line or word that comes out of nowhere. Right.
Yeah.
And that sort of style of humor has really stuck with me.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And
just
there's so many like sort of aesthetic features that just really, really burrowed under my skin in a way. And like all that, you know, this is a big part of why I like the Locked Tomb series so much, written by Tamsin Weir, who got her start writing fan fiction for Homestuck. Like,
no joke. There will be at least one college level course somewhere about like Homestuck's influence upon popular culture as you look out, because, you know,
for sure.
Yeah, like,
it's everywhere.
I mean, the Locked Tomb trilogy is very, as I understand it, is very, very influenced by Homestuck. Undertale is possibly bigger than Homestuck at this point now.
Depending on how you're framing it. Yeah.
I mean, like I feel like I hear more Undertale and see more Undertale stuff than I do Homestuck. But then again, it's also that's newer,
it's more recent,
and it's still producing content sort of, because there's a sort of semi-sequel stuff I think that's still going on. So like that's, but like, I don't know, like it's still, I mean, like freaking, like how many views did the various Megalovania fight animatics that people put on YouTube?
A jillion, right?
Yeah,
like so many.
And the number of like alternate universes that exist for Undertale is with like their own lore and stuff like that from fan creation and stuff. Yeah,
that is the other thing I wanted to mention about Homestuck is the alternate universe thing. The other thing that Homestuck did, again, this interaction with the fandom situation, is that they basically, Hussey wrote in a thing that made it so like, hey, if you write an AU, it's canon.
Yeah.
There's this concept of dream bubbles, which are effectively portals to the afterlife. Right. That you can sort of access when you're sleeping or dreaming in some ways. Right. But this is where when you die, you go to the dream bubbles, basically. Yeah. And so every possible iteration of all of these characters also have infinite other iterations from, you know, various alternate universes or alternate timelines of varying degrees of difference.
Yeah.
So if you wrote the coffee shop Homestuck AU, that's in there somewhere.
Yeah. That the more you talk about it, the more convinced I am that Andrew Hussey may have been doing all of that on purpose. Like,
no chance wasn't on purpose.
Yeah, but I'm saying like that being so obviously on purpose says that the other sort of like crafting this to hit a particular audience sounds more and more like Andrew Hussey was doing that on like, okay, I know what I'm doing and I know how I'm getting my hooks into these people.
Yes.
No shade, like getting your art in front of people and getting people to care about it is like, I'll use all the tools available to you. Yeah. Like do use every single tool available to you. No. We're not talking about a big corporation here. So I don't, like, this is not, I'm not trying to throw shade. Like really impressive actually that to be able to do that with the, on purpose, not just do it on accident, but seemingly do it on purpose. And the more you talk about, the more I think that it was on purpose, which is cool.
Yeah. I think especially as you get a little later into it,
Yeah.
and I think they realize the things that are happening. They begin to replicate those things on purpose.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Deliberately leveraging your audience in a way that like is
in a way that is, good, like in terms of marketing and audience interaction, but also is intentionally creating arguments in your fandom.
Yeah.
Right?
So you have a big, very involved fandom who want to be active, and it would have been even better in the engagement era, because like this is sort of pre-algorithmically driven internet, and but now I'm sure it would be inescapable almost.
Oh my God, I'm trying to imagine if Homestuck was like if Twitter 3 years ago, and Homestuck at its peak were at the same time. Twitter would have just been completely unusable
for different reasons than it's currently unusable.
People yelling about Vriska and nothing else.
Yeah. Like, as I'm sure there were many forums that we now miss that had to cordon off the Homestuck discourse.
Literally cordon off. Yeah.
No, I've been on forums where like people came in with talking about other stuff, and you're like, no, okay, go to the fucking off topic section. We'll have a dedicated thread for you.
We have a thread. We have a thread. We have a 7th iteration of the thread because the first 6 have gotten locked. Yeah.
Because we hit the post count. We can't. Yeah. Been there, done that.
Yep.
Okay. Well, this was a lovely conversation, Quill. Thank you so much for showing up. And do you want to point people anywhere on the internet if they want to find more about you and your work?
Sure. If you want to find me, you can see me occasionally post and mostly repost things on Blue Sky at polyamorous-q. You can also find the game design that eventually I will make more of over at Quintessential Gaming on itch.
Yeah.
Those are pretty much the me places. Also, go listen to Breathing Space.
Yeah,
the final season of which will, I imagine, have at least a couple episodes out by the time this drops.
Who knows? The problem is, as of time of recording, the first episode of season 4 drops literally a week from right now. Basically, we will be just finishing up the premiere as we are recording this. But the problem is, I have to like figure out my front matter and back matter. But like I could have this out by next week. It's intro and outro. If I figure out what I'm doing, I could have them out this weekend. So I have no idea. You won't get a warning, by the way. You'll just find out that it's up when I like tweet at you and be like, hey, or please go at you and be like, hey, it's out now. I hope you stand by all the shit you said.
It's fine. Don't worry. I sub to this feed. I'll get a notification there.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, and then also listen to Unspeakable Distance if you haven't done that.
Yeah.
Not to plug exclusively Scott Paladin products, but also I'm exclusively in Scott Paladin projects. So there you go.
Strange how that happens. Yeah. That like you find cool people to work with and you just keep working with them. Yeah. I don't imagine how that happens.
Yeah, that's me pretty much. So
all right.
I don't think I have anything else to plug.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, if I'll put some links down in the show notes if you wanna click them without having to actually do the searching. But thank you so much, and we will catch you guys, the audience, sometime. I don't know. There's no schedule. These things just come out when they come out. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that does it for us this time. Thanks again to Quill for taking me by the hand and leading me down the primrose trail of Homestuck and its many vagaries. If you'd like to help the show out, why don't you tell a friend about us, or just take their phone and subscribe it to us. Or you can head on over to patreon.com/cursedknowledge and maybe, it's equivalent of like tipping their waiter, right? Anyway, join us next week when we're going to be talking about Hellboy with S.J. Riker.